So welcome everybody to this webinar. We wanted to give a very high-level overview of what's going on in other areas that are, however, very strictly linked to the work that the NRNs do in Europe. And one of these is, of course, the mobility, the student mobility activities and the Erasmus programs. So actually this was a very nice collaboration that was initiated via a workshop organized by the European Commission 1 year ago. And we, Jean, was participating there, as well as the European University Foundation, who is represented here by Joachim Wissling and Victor Aguilar, so they are both here, and we explored synergies to cooperate better, and you will hear more about this. The European University Foundation is leading the Erasmus Without Paper project, and they will tell a bit more about the efforts done in this space. We have also here Graham Robertson from DG EC, and he will cover some of the aspects. We have also included a small update on the MyAcademicID project, which is where, let's say, the formal collaboration is really taking place to bring the EduGain, EDAS, and MyAcademicID together. This said, I will stop talking and I will hand the ball over to Joachim.
Yes, let me start with a quick introduction to the European University Foundation before Victor takes over in providing you some updates. After also the European Commission, Graham has been providing some overview of how yes, these digitalization initiatives in the Erasmus Plus program are being conducted. But for us, I guess you all see my screen now. Yeah, okay, great. For us, it was important so that you also understand where we stem from and what are the people that work in the European University Foundation standing for. So as a quick introduction, the overall purpose of the European University Foundation is to contribute to the modernization of the European higher education area. And we do this notably by addressing the question of the quality and quantity of student and staff mobility. So we use this basically as leverage to modernize higher education institutions and programs that leads to their cooperation. We do this with 20 full members and these days 26 associate members. There are 2 logos missing by as of today, so sorry for that. So we are actually a network of universities, and this network of universities, they do set the agenda, the strategy, the budget of the foundation, and they do also basically tell us which projects we should engage in and which we should rather not. And this is why we clustered a bit the activities of the foundation in 5 main pillars. So you have mobility, employability, digital higher education, policy innovation, and active citizenship. And the central one that is, by chance, the central one of these 5 pillars is digital higher education. And this is the one that we'll be talking about today. And this pillar, our member universities have told us and we are developing together with them the digital initiatives such as the Erasmus Without Paper, the online learning agreements, the Erasmus Plus app, but also MyAcademicID that we have started this year. So those are the initiatives that sort of take place under this umbrella, and Victor will be giving you some more deeper insights on how they unfold, not only within the context of the network, but in the context of the Erasmus Plus program. That's it from my side, very short introduction. If there is any quick question that you have in terms of some clarification, feel free to ask now, and otherwise I'm also available to respond to email requests in this regard.
I have a question if no one else is speaking up.
Sure.
So on the slide with all the partners, I do not see any NRANs. Is there a specific reason for that? Or maybe the question is better formed as how do you engage with NRANs?
How we, that's actually, well, it was part of should have been part of my introduction presentation. You're definitely right asking this question. These partners are the members of the European University Foundation. So basically the legal structure that is leading this project, such as Erasmus Without Paper, MyAcademicID. And there's a very specific reason that we started cooperating as well with Géant since January 2019, very formally in the context of this project, is that of course we want also to bridge the gap that we have with the NRENs, and this is also the reason of this first webinar today, so that we start getting to know each other, you start getting to know about our projects, and we also look into future collaboration avenues in this regard. But of course, let's say at European level, our main contact point is going to be Géant, also the Edugain coordinator, and but there won't be, let's say, a formal link that will exist between the European University Foundation and the NRENs. So we'll go through a close partnership with Géant in this regard.
Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Joachim, for the introduction to the European University Foundation. My name is Victor, and I will be telling all of you a little bit about the projects or some of the projects that we are coordinating from our side. It's including the one that Licia mentioned before, MyAcademicID. But before that, I would like to give the floor to Graham Robertson, who is visiting from the European Commission, from the Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture. And the reason is because he would like to give us a general overview of what's going on from the side of the policymakers and how this strategy that they have put in place is connecting a lot of the efforts that are currently underway. So without further ado, Graham, please feel free to take the floor.
Okay, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me and see me? Am I live? Yep, okay. Thank you very much, Victor. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you this afternoon. As Victor says, I'm going to take you through a very quick overview more from a policy side about why we're doing this and how the different parts connect together. So let me start my screen running. Okay, my screen visible? And am I still visible? Okay, good. Here we go. So yes, it's the broader European Student Card Initiative, which I hope you've heard something about. Okay, and it's part of the build up towards the European education area, which we're wanting to have in place by 2025. Now that concept came out from the education ministers. In fact, not just education ministers, but actually the heads of state for the European member states that met together in Gothenburg in 2017 and confirmed the concept of a European education area where spending time abroad to study becomes normal, where there's automatic recognition of diplomas and school qualifications, as well as including the recognition of time spent abroad studying, where language learning, again, is a standard and people are able to speak at least 2 other languages. Being British, I can hold my hand up and say we've got a long way to go in there, but that's our ambition by 2025. Where educational excellence is reality for all, and hopefully you were all aware of the launch or the announcement of the 17 alliances that secured funding through the European Universities Initiative last week, week before, and that's part of raising the excellence levels for universities around Europe, and also through the European education area, but building a strong sense of identity for people as Europeans and of Europe's cultural heritage and its diversity in all its forms. To back this up, We have the Erasmus program, currently called the Erasmus Plus program. We're coming towards the end of that Erasmus Plus program, and we're negotiating with Parliament and member states at the moment to get the next Erasmus program in place. And we're being very ambitious. We want to, or the Commission has asked to more than double the budget from just under 15 billion to 30 billion. The European Parliament is even talking about doubling that again up to potentially 60 billion. So whatever way we go, we're looking that we should be able to support many, many more people to take advantage of the opportunities that are there to learn, study, volunteer, whatever, in another European country through the Erasmus program. But to do that, to make that reality, we know that we need to help higher education institutions to make things a lot more efficient around student mobility, which is why we've developed the European Student Card Initiative to try to, on one hand, remove the paper from the mobility administration at the moment, and make things much more efficient so that international relations officers can either deal with more students or give more support to those who are mobile coming in or going out from their university. And we're also looking at the other part of the initiative is the European Student Card part, which is the development of a European student identity through the enhancement of existing existing student cards at European universities. So we are financing different projects in the moment. We're financing the Erasmus Without Paper project, which is, as it says, building a network, secure network between higher educations within Europe to allow for the secure transfer of data about students between the institutions. We're also developing the Erasmus Plus mobile app. That's going to be radically enhanced over the next 2 years, 3 years, to become a single point of entry for students into all these services. And we're also supporting projects that you'll hear about later, MyAcademicID, which is looking to develop student identifiers for students at European universities, and also secure login authentication services for students. Now, other people are going to talk about the Erasmus Without Paper, MyAcademicID, in more detail later. But I can talk about the Erasmus Plus mobile app in a little bit more, and also about its European Student Card in a bit more detail. I do apologise, I'm quite heavily got a cold at the moment, so if I'm stopping and sniffing, then bear with me. I do apologise. What we're trying to create is a single entry point for mobility coordinators, so that either through their own tools or through Erasmus Without Paper tools, they have somewhere where they can manage the whole lifespan of a student mobility. Before the mobility happens, during the mobility, and what happens when a student comes back. So we're talking about electronic applications and nominations, handling those online with students, securely exchanging student data between universities, so avoiding the case just now, as you know, of using lots of emails and scanning and I was going to say faxing, but I don't think anybody faxes anymore. But yeah, certainly lots of scanning and email exchanges, including as well being able to send reminders and messages to students online directly to their mobile phones via the mobile app. And a new thing, very new thing as well, is exporting data automatically to the Commission's Mobility Tool Plus, where previously administrators had to basically type in the details of the mobility again into a separate system. Then we're already building that interface from this single point of entry into the Commission systems to avoid double keying. And through the system, we're looking at managing the interinstitutional agreements, the online learning agreements, as I mentioned, online nominations, and then transcript of records, all as part of this single point of entry for mobility coordinators, which is facilitated by Erasmus, Erasmus Without Paper network. We're also looking at developing the single point of entry for students. I mentioned we're radically redeveloping the Erasmus Without Plus mobile app. We've just recently launched a tender for that redevelopment. And through that, we want students to be able to, again, find the information and service they need to manage their mobility before, during, and after their mobilities. So that's researching, partnering universities, where can they go to, what courses can they do, and then applying for the period of mobility, managing their online learning agreements, easily accessing the online linguistic support that's available through Erasmus+. I'm actually writing the technical specifications for that at the moment as well. And we'll try to ensure that there's a seamless connection into linguistic support from all of these tools for students. And then when a student is in their period of mobility, how do they better connect to the activities and events that are happening around them in their host university? And then coming back to the European Student Card, adding a virtual version of the European Student Card onto this mobile device. Now, as I mentioned, other colleagues are going to talk more about the Erasmus Without Paper and MyAcademicID projects. So I'll go and say a little bit more about the European Student Cards, because I know sometimes there's a little bit of confusion about the whole initiative and the card itself. So the European Student Card project, developed through a pilot project between 2016 and 2018, managed by the National Student Services Agency in France, CNUS. And the concept is to facilitate recognition of student status across Europe. And as part of this European education area, building this sense of European student identity. The concept is for a physical card plus a virtual card. And eventually we may, as universities move, we may eventually move away from physical cards and only into virtual cards. And the idea is that the same card eventually may allow the student to get access to universities in their home university and in their host university. So when they're abroad, they can use the same card to get access to campus services at both universities. If, and it's a big if the technologies in those campuses are compatible. If they're not, then the student may well have to get a campus card for their host university, but over time, there may well be convergence. We're also looking at the card can be used out of campus to access the same deals and services that local students can get, and then also use the card to prove their student status online. Now, as I said, we're not creating a new central European student card to replace existing cards. That is not what we're about. Instead, we're looking to use the existing student cards that are issued by universities or their student unions or by national authorities and turning them into European student cards with the addition of a special European student card hologram, a QR code to allow the cards to be scanned for things like libraries or catering, and a unique student card number. This means there would be no requirement to change any existing co-branding arrangements or campus hardware, software. However, if it was possible for software, hardware to be changed easily, efficiently, cost efficiently to use the new cards, for instance, read the hologram for library services, then we'd certainly encourage universities to do that if that was possible. And then for security, because we want to make sure that these cards are not available to anybody, then we'd be looking to set up mechanisms that only accredited universities can get, or authorized universities can get their hands onto these special holograms put onto the cards. And development's already been done for generating APIs to generate the unique card numbers that need to go onto these cards. That was already done as part of the concept project in 2016 to 18. So in terms of timescales, next steps, we've already been doing a lot of work on this. You'll hear about a lot of the work that's been done in Erasmus Without Paper. We're looking for the first elements of this to be ready for the start of the next Erasmus program. We are planning to make the use of electronic data transfers using the Erasmus Without Paper standards, make that mandatory in a staged process from 2021, making the use of online learning agreements and interinstitutional agreements mandatory by the start of the new program. Handling nominations for mobilities by 2022 online, and handling online the transcripts of records and transfers of those between institutions by 2023. With the big caveat that we will only do this if the tools are fit for purpose. We're not going to blindly make it mandatory without knowing that, which is why we've got over 1,000 institutions have signed up to do real life field testing of the Erasmus Without Paper dashboard. And we'd encourage more institutions to get involved in that. I'm sure that will be talked about in the next presentations. And we're working with the European Student Card Project to move that from the concept phase to being ready to get that rolled out across Europe over the coming years as well. So moving that from concept into rollout in the next 2 years. So that was it. Thank you very much for your time. That was a very quick run through from my side. If you have any questions, happy to take them at the end. If you want to contact us directly, then our email address is there, eac-he@ec.europa.eu. So thank you very much again for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar. Thank you.
Are there any questions about this?
Do you accept questions now or maybe later?
I don't know if you, depends a little bit if you can hold that, otherwise we can also have some questions now.
Okay, I can postpone the question for the later.
Okay.
No problem.
Okay. Then Victor.
Thank you, Licia, and thank you, Graham, for that very good overview. I will now tell you a little bit about the projects that the European University Foundation has been involved in for the past years. And for that, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Just give me a second. Can you see my screen now? Okay, excellent. And I hope you can hear me well. All right. Well, as I mentioned before, my name is Victor Aguilar. I work for the European University Foundation, just as Joachim, who introduced the European University Foundation at the beginning of the webinar. And today we would like to tell you about two big projects that we are involved in. One is Erasmus Without Paper, that has been mentioned already by Graham a couple of times. The other one is MyAcademicID, in which we are directly collaborating with Jean since January this year. Now you can see two EU logos at the bottom of the project logos, and that is because both projects are receiving funding from the European Commission through two different programs. Erasmus Without Paper is funded by the Erasmus Plus program of the European Union, whereas MyAcademicID is co-financed by the Connecting Europe Facility funding scheme that is also part of the European Union, but managed by a different directorate, which is DG Connectivity. Directorate General for Connectivity. Now, Graham already told you about Erasmus Plus. I just wanted to show you a short timeline of the evolution of the program, because it lies at the core of a lot of the projects that we work on at the European University Foundation. Now, I would actually be curious to learn how many of you went on mobility through Erasmus Plus. This is a program that started in 1987. It was born almost now 32 years ago. And the first year when I was implemented by the European Union, only around 3,000 students from 11 different countries went abroad on mobility. But the program was hugely successful, and shortly afterwards, more and more students started taking part in it. In 2014, the Erasmus program evolved and became Erasmus Plus. Which is why sometimes you will encounter the name of this program under two different brands. It's the same. Now, the difference is that in 2014, the Plus was added because 7 previous mobility programs or funding programs were merged and were brought together under the same umbrella, including the old Erasmus program, Erasmus Mundus, Comenius, Grundvik. You may have heard of some of these. And the thing is, in 2017, the program turned 30 years. And by that time, so in 30 years, 9 million people had already benefited from some sort of funding through this scheme. And not only higher education students, but also youth workers, trainers, trainees, staff. It's a massive program. And the benefits started being clear, not only for policymakers, but for participants themselves. So students, staff, trainers, they were coming back home with improved skills, a better knowledge of other European cultures, languages. They increased their employability prospects. And the European Commission started investing more and more money, to the point that, as Graham said before, the proposal for the next multi-annual budget of the European Union is to at least double the budget that the program has had so far. So this means that, of course, more students will go abroad, and that also translates into more mobilities and, in theory, also a higher workload for universities. Now, the funny thing is that even though the program has evolved quite a lot since the beginning, a lot of the core procedures and the way students continue to apply for mobility is still, to a large extent, paper-based. So this is also a little bit ironic in an age where a lot of things already happen online. So we do banking transactions online, for example. We even have started dating online, but Erasmus Plus, it's still to a large extent paper-based. So this is why the European University Foundation, who has as one of its aims and pillars to improve student mobility and to modernize higher education in Europe, has launched what we have called ourselves this Erasmus Going Digital initiative, which basically means digitizing a lot of the core procedures within the Erasmus Plus program. From the moment when a student applies for mobility under Erasmus Plus till the moment when the student comes back to their home institution and the credits and the courses that the student has taken abroad are recognized. So the image that you see there describes this mobility cycle and more or less what we're, the different key steps in the mobility of students. So what the European University Foundation is trying to do is to digitize those key steps to make sure that information flows seamlessly from students to institutions and from one institution to another all across the European Union and the countries that take part in this scheme. So we can hopefully very soon do away with paper-based procedures and allow higher education institutions who have subscribed to ECHE, which stands for European Erasmus Charter for Higher Education, can send students to a different country, to a different university, and also take students in a seamless way. Now I see that some people are writing in the chat. I cannot see it right here. Okay, very good. So Rolf says that he did 2 semesters in UK and France with Erasmus, alma mater in Switzerland. That is very good to hear. Thank you for taking part in this mini poll. So you know, Rolf, what it is like to apply for mobility through Erasmus+, and maybe you can relate a little bit more to what I'm saying. The reason why I'm trying to explain this in a simple way is because the different projects that have been mentioned before and the European Student Card Initiative are a big attempt at making this procedure digital. So as Graham had said before, the overall aim is to have 2 main entry points, one for higher education institutions and one for students. Now, the way these things have developed is that the single entry point for higher education institutions will be what we know as Erasmus Without Paper network, and the single entry point for students is the Erasmus Plus mobile app. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it. The idea behind this is that once mobility coordinators in institutions access this digital scheme, or students access this digital scheme, they will be granted access to different electronic services that should allow them to go on mobility in an easier way and to exchange information seamlessly. The first one, I'm going to tell you first about the entry point for institutions, which is Erasmus Without Paper. In a nutshell, this is an electronic network that enables interoperability among the student management systems of different universities. And the overall aim is to interconnect all the ECHE holders out there. The ECHE holders, as I said before, are the ones that have subscribed to the Erasmus Charter for Higher Education, which is a precondition for universities to be able to benefit from and take part in the Erasmus Plus program and send students on exchange abroad. So this Erasmus Without Paper network has already was officially put in place last year at a big conference that we had in Ghent, but it had already been tested and prototyped for quite a few years. And now higher education institutions can connect to the network and start exchanging data in an electronic format. So basically what Erasmus Without Paper allows for is higher education institutions to speak the same language and communicate with one another. This is a slide that I borrowed from a different presentation that the European Commission has made before. And this is just to illustrate that just the exact same way that everybody likes to drink their coffee slightly different. So some of us like it without milk, some of us like it with a lot of milk. Some people actually like milk with a tiny bit of coffee there. And I see Licia smiling because I know Italians are very, very strict about coffee. Just the same way that coffee drinkers are different around the world, higher education institutions also have different procedures in place. And when we were developing the Erasmus Without Paper network, we took that into account because we know that some institutions already have certain tools that they use to manage their students that are registered there. Some of them actually hire a private commercial provider for managing that, and some of them don't have any specific IT tool. At the core of Erasmus Without Paper lies the conviction that everybody should have access to this infrastructure. So we have made it possible for everybody to join. If somebody already has an in-house developed tool, they can connect that tool to the Erasmus Without Paper network. If somebody uses an external commercial provider, that external commercial provider can connect to the Erasmus Without Paper network. And if there is no tool whatsoever, well, the European University Foundation, together with the project partners of Erasmus Without Paper, has developed what we called the Erasmus Without Paper dashboard, which is another of the projects that I would like to briefly explain to you today. The Erasmus dashboard is a free public cloud-based solution for those universities who do not have or that do not have suitable IT tools. So no specific IT knowledge is required. And they are, while accessing Erasmus dashboard, they are able to manage the students that come to their university on exchange from a different higher education institutions and to send students abroad, to initiate, sign, and decline online learning agreements, which are basically these agreements that the student, the sending institution, and the receiving institution have to sign in order to agree on the terms of mobility and the courses that the student is going to take abroad, etc., etc. And more importantly, through this tool, universities can also communicate with the students that are going abroad, so they can exchange information. Any university that has signed up to the Erasmus Charter for Higher Education can access and request an account on the Erasmus dashboard. We have seen steady growth in the number of universities that have joined the Erasmus dashboard. So almost 1/5 of all the ECHE holders are now in this scheme. Finally, the last project that I want to, the penultimate project that I want to mention here is Erasmus Plus mobile app. This is the single entry point for students into this digital scheme. Students download the app and they can get step-by-step checklists of what to do in order to go abroad. The app is connected to the online learning agreement that I'm going to explain in a second, and they can receive also push notifications from their universities and also get some useful tips from other Erasmus Plus participants. Finally, one of the services that students can access when they are inside this digital ecosystem is the online learning agreement, which is this agreement that I mentioned before has to be signed by both the sending and the receiving institution and the student. This is basically a tool that allows the institutions and the students to sign this electronically and then, well, basically be granted the mobility. So in a nutshell, again, this is a different way of depicting what we're aiming for, which is giving higher education institutions a single point of entry and students as well into this digital ecosystem so that they can access electronic services and exchange information online. Now, these projects which are receiving EU funding are not projects done by one organization. They are all made up of consortia that are big, that pool together different resources and different expertise. So these are the partners of the Erasmus Without Paper project, which is now in its second phase and will be running until the end of this year. The partners of the online learning agreement project are also several. You can see among them different universities and also the Erasmus student network. The Erasmus Plus mobile app is the same, students, the European University Foundation that represents different universities and the European Commission itself. And this is, well, basically just bringing together a 360-degree approach where things fall neatly together and information flows seamlessly. And this also goes in line with the idea of tearing down barriers to any mobility within the European Union. Now, let me jump into MyAcademicID. MyAcademicID, as was mentioned before, is a project where the European University Foundation and GEANT are collaborating since January this year. And why this is important and why we mentioned all the other projects before is because MyAcademicID will play a key role in all of them. So MyAcademicID is a project that will run for the next 18 months. And the easiest way to describe it is as digital infrastructure. What we're trying to come up with is a European Student EID scheme for higher education, a European Student EID scheme, for higher education that will allow mobile students to safely and seamlessly authenticate themselves when going abroad mobility and access electronic services. So basically verify their identity electronically. Now, the way that we are going to achieve this is by integrating three different networks or schemes that are already out there. EduGain, which most of you are probably well acquainted with, EIDAS, which is the European Union's regulation on electronic identification, electronic transactions, and the European Student Identifier, which comes from the European Student Card project that I'm going to tell you briefly about. Once this European Student EID scheme is put in place, we're going to have 4 key electronic services integrate that EID, 3 of which I've already mentioned before: the online learning agreement, the Erasmus Plus mobile app, and the Erasmus dashboard. So students can access these services through a single sign-on, they can verify their identity online, and they can get access to mobility. The 4th one is the PhD Hub platform, which is basically an online hub where PhD students, universities, and businesses can interact to find new opportunities for research and networking. So just briefly, the European Student Card project, which is also a part of this consortium, is also an Erasmus Plus funded project that ran for 2 years from, I believe, 2016 to 2018. And the main aim behind this project was to establish a common digital and graphic identity on European student cards in order to allow students to travel, move between countries, go on mobility, and always benefit from their student status. So the way they did it was by adding a hologram to existing student cards and a QR code that could be read by service providers when the student, for instance, went to the cafeteria or went to the library. And by reading that QR code and basically querying the central database where the student cards are registered, they would be able to verify that the student was actually a student in the university where he or she came from. The European Student Card Project, interestingly, developed as well a European Student Identifier, a unique student identifier that was associated with each of the cards, and that is in the form of the IBAN identifier. You can see there that it consists of a country code, a region code, the unique participation identification code of the university, and this local student identifier. So this way they managed to put together a unique European student identifier that now, in the context of MyAcademicID, we are taking into account to develop this digital scheme that I've mentioned before. Now, MyAcademicID project is a very short project. It's only 18 months. So here is a rough timeline of the key connections that we're going to be making. By August this year, we're going to be integrating EduGain, the European Student Identifier. By October this year, in theory, we should be able to make a bridge between EduGain and EIDAS. By spring next year, the electronic services that I mentioned before will be integrating this scheme. And towards the end of the project, we will be able to put out there the sustainability and scalability requirements in order to fully integrate all this with Erasmus without paper. Now, here are two very basic examples of what this could look like in the real world. Of course, bear in mind that this stick person there should be a real student, and that the card that she's holding is rather an EID, okay, powered by EduGain. So this student identifying through EduGain should be able to authenticate her status as a student on the different services that we have talked about. And in the future, of course, more services should be able to join this scheme. And the service providers or the institutions that are receiving this information can rest assured that the student is indeed one and that he or she is who she claims to be. Another use case, in theory, would be thanks to the connection with the EIDAS network. So at some point in the future, especially once the EIDAS network is fully deployed and rolled out, students should be able to register at higher education institutions, for example, using their national EID. So, of course, among the benefits beyond a reliable student identification and authentication is reusing already existing digital infrastructure. The access to these services through a single sign-on truly reinforce student status around Europe, and of course, lower administrative costs for higher education institutions and for students themselves. Now, this being a transnational project as well, you can see there the 13 partners that are behind it. So the project is coordinated by the European University Foundation, indeed, but we are relying heavily on the expertise and the resources that other partners bring to the table. So you can see there a couple of NRENs, GEAN itself, CNUS, which is a partner behind the European Student Card Project, and a couple of foundations that also deal with the provision of student services. So for now, this is all I have to show. So I'm sure that you will have some questions, and we will do our very best to answer them for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. This was really excellent. Before we take questions, I just want to say a couple of words on the importance of this project. As I mean, of course, Giant is there because we believe this is something really strategically important for us. There are a couple of reasons for that. I have some slides. Maybe I can just quickly put them on. Share here. Let me check. Right. So the reasons why we are doing this, basically, for those of you that have been involved in the discussion in EduGain, you are aware that we have been trying to address interoperability with EADAS, mostly as on the consumer side, as in enabling user with an EID to access services that are in EduGain. This has been, I mean, maybe we were just a little bit too ahead before times, but we have had several conversations with different people also involved in EADAS, but at the end, we never really came to a concrete collaboration, and things remained very much on a high level. So from our point of view, the fact that EADAS themselves sees the Erasmus community as a community that could be a potential a user for EADAS is of course something good. EADAS is not deployed yet, but more and more countries are now getting notified. So, I mean, slowly things will move on. And we are aware that there are also students that sometimes come from institutions where they either do not belong to a national federation or their institution is not really participating in EduGain. So we have to cater for all, we have to be inclusive. So EADAS allows us also to reach out to this other dimension. However, what we have now is EduGain, and there are really thousands of institutions that are participating in EduGain, most of which are also participating in Erasmus activities and projects. So this seems to be really an easy, I mean, a natural connection to establish. As I said, what we are looking for here is not something really on the short term. We are really looking at an opportunity to build an architecture that that stays beyond the scope of the MyAcademicID, and where we can really establish some integration with EADAS. And of course, what was at least on our side, on the Jean side, what we were not really aware of was the European Student Card, the initiative. That's something that, let's say, the framework as well as the project. We discovered about that while we were talking to the project people to understand which services would require what. And there are benefits for that. So we also needed to understand a little bit better the ecosystem where things are happening. To that end, we organized this technical workshop because it was very important to understand what we have, what we want to integrate, and where we want to be. And actually, this slide was made by Christos. You probably recognize the nice style that he used. We started to look at the student cards, whether they are a real card or an e-card. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But for some services, maybe what is needed is just identification of the users, being able to determine this person has got a card, therefore they are a student. More sophisticated checks are probably not needed in a very busy context, cafeteria, etc. There is maybe a risk that the provider takes, but maybe it's just well worth it because you get the numbers. There are, on the other hand, other things that are more critical, like some of the services that Victor mentioned, for which you really need to have more sophisticated mechanism also to understand where the user comes from, where the grants have to be transferred to, who is authorized to do what, etc. So, and in all these processes, the assurance level and the trust, let's say, that is needed in the process grows. Up to the point EADAS, of course, the EAD is issued by the government, so this has the highest assurance that we can think of at this point in time. So what I was saying, so strategically importance, absolutely. First of all, because we are having this opportunity to collaborate with EUF and also to better understand the Erasmus project, universities, and what is the link with the NRNs, which are there to support research and education after all. And many NRNs are already aware of all this, so I think this was a good thing. Then having a project, even if it's a small project, small grant, because MyAcademicID is a small project, gives a framework for people to work together and to start building things together. So this is really the first step to get all these things together and to start explore really technical interoperability. And we are doing this also with the EDAS via SUNET that operates also the national federation as well as the EDAS node for Sweden. So we have really a concrete way to test things. And of course with EduGain that is operated via GÉANT. And the plans, this was very clear from the Erasmus community, from the UF, that this is not a project just to do some theoretical test and an academic exercise. The idea is they have a real need to enable federated access to their services and to move to an online format. So the idea is really to have this as pilot, look at all technical aspect, policy aspect, GDPR, etc., but to continue beyond MyAcademicID. There are already discussions that we are having. MyAcademicID, is important to note, is funded by the CEF calls, which are not what usually NRNs would apply. The NRNs would apply typically for Horizon 2020 projects. This is a different group of calls, but this is the best way to where different players come together. And there is another CEF call that has been open that will close, in November, and that is really about supporting infrastructure. So we are also exploring the possibility to continue some of this work and to move what we are piloting here into further, to advance it further and to move that into production, possibly by that route or other routes. So we are really having this conversation at this point in time. So that's all I wanted to say, and I see that there are questions, so I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll leave the floor open to questions. Some on the chat, but otherwise feel free to also ask online. So Miro, you had some questions, if Miro is still there. Oh, Miro, it was disconnected and some other people were disconnected. I see on the chat. So, all right. Anyway, questions, anybody?
If there are no comments, questions, then I'll do a quick one from my side. I think this was, at least for us, from the side of this digitization project, it's useful to start getting to know the other side, the NRENs, and seeing how you operate, insofar that since those projects have been created by the universities and are now about to become integrated and part of the Erasmus Plus program, of course, this will also somehow reflect and impact the digitization initiatives that are not specific to Erasmus Plus, but general to higher education and research. So we have to make sure that we sort of align our initiatives and work jointly here. And I think the key endeavor that we're looking to achieving is that on one side, we manage to have students indeed authenticating across systems using their home student credentials, be it on online tools such as the Erasmus Plus mobile app, also the learning management systems of the different universities. You have worked on this already, so we want to get this into, say, the educational sphere. And the other point is as well the question of the identification of the students across higher education institutions in Europe. So of course we look at the unicity of these EIDs, the question of the lifelong learning aspect of this, so that when a student moves from one country to another country and he maybe gets a bachelor in France and then a master's degree in Germany and then maybe goes for a PhD in Hungary, and instead of having to submit all the paperwork in this regard, he can just identify himself at a host institution and transfer this sort of documentation. That is, of course, let's say the long-term output. What of course we're looking to is to make that happen through the lenses of Erasmus Plus, by having it embedded in the program. But that of course can generate a spillover effect on the other activities that are related to higher education. Yeah. And something else I can add is that we will have a midterm conference taking place in Berlin. Victor, correct me if I'm wrong, which is going to be the 21st, 22nd of November at the Humboldt University. So you can already mark those dates in your agendas. You can visit the website of MyAcademicID.eu, and it will be really great as well to have you there and to maybe potentially engage in more detailed discussions on how we can work within RENs beyond the life cycle of the MyAcademicID project, which is basically going to finish in more or less 12 months.
So yes, just the midterm conference is on November 20 and 21st. So I'm gonna copy paste the link to the MyAcademicID website, where you can also find the registration to the event in case you're interested and you want to attend.
Yes, I don't know if Mir is back online. I see him.
Yes, I am.
Yes, there you are.
I was fighting with network altogether. So let me introduce myself just for the colleagues from the EC and European Universities Foundation. I'm Miroslav Milinovic, and I work for the University Computing Center in Zagreb, Croatia. We are coordinating the Federation, Academic Identity Federation, but also National IT System for Higher Education and Research. So Croatia has a student card which is already considered or regulated by the Ministry of Education and Science as the official document. So question to Graham, putting something on that document is a bit of work, but is the current spec for the, if I wrote it properly, QR code, hologram, and student card number, is it now, so to say, standardized, carved in stone, or will it change over time? So how fixed is the current spec?
To my knowledge, the spec is pretty fixed. The project that was working on this finished, as I say, last year, and is getting ready to move into the next phase. So I think once they get funding to move into that phase, then they will be able to start giving detailed specifications out. But to my knowledge, the specifications as they are pretty fixed. If you want to contact the European Student Card Project directly, they will be very happy to talk to you about it. If you Google European Student Cards, you'll find their project website. It's actually above us in the Google rankings when you type in European Student Card. And you'll be able to contact them directly through the website, and they'll be able to give you the precise information that you're looking for.
Yeah, because in our case, if we're gonna do it, we're gonna do it for the whole community. So
which would be absolutely perfect. I know that Jean-Paul Romagas from the European Student Card Project was listening into this webinar, but I don't know if he's been disconnected and is back in yet.
I think he's back.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you, not see you, but we can hear you.
You cannot see me. Well, okay.
I can see you.
I can see you. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
So thank you, Graham, for presenting so precisely the ESC, the European Student Card Project. Yeah, I wanted just to add to what you have said, Graham, that it's much more than a concept, much more than a pilot. We were counting the universities already connected and implementing the student card, and there are about 80 in the last week, 80 universities. And the number of universities is increasing every day, and we are working with whole systems of higher education with this idea of connecting the student cards. So this is important. And about the spec for the colleague from Zagreb, I understand.
Yes, Croatia.
Yeah.
It's not, yeah.
Yeah, yes, you have them available on the website, and you can, if you need any detail, we can be in touch, of course.
Okay, that's it. Because I mean, if we're gonna do it, or when we're gonna do it, it will be whole country at the same time. It won't be per university. It will be all universities due to the nature of the system, which is centralized. So it probably will start with a certain generation of freshmen, and then gradually change the cards over time for the other students. And it's quite important to have a fixed specification so the ministry can do all the necessary legal steps to legalize it, legalize the changes in the appearance of the card for the national purpose.
Great, yeah, that's much better if it's a national approach.
Yes, it's a national card, and it's regulated by some. It's not a law, by some decree from the minister, which makes it a public document that could be used.
And of course, it means that you have a national identifier for the students.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But that also means that we can very easily follow your standard for the card number, because we actually just add the country identifier in front of what we already have. So,
exactly. So it's very easy, yeah.
It's already done deal. Okay, thank you so much. If I may, when I'm speaking, just a question for all of us. I very much like the idea of using the EduGain and the current federated identities, academic federations. So if I got it right, the aim of MyAcademicID, and I was not listening all the time, fighting with the technology, actually is not to invent another identity. It's more like make use of the current identities and possibly map when needed and where needed ADAS identity with the EduGain identity, although EduGain does not exist. Am I right?
Yes, Miro, you are very right. The idea is really not to reinvent anything, but it's basically along the line of that what we have been doing for a while. Not burden users to get new IDs per service specific, but allow them to use either their institution ID or their EID if they have one, and then let the system do all the background work to map users to services as needed.
Alicia, I have a question. So you are saying that we are going to do account linking between the institutional authentication, current authentication, and the student ID that we will have, the European student ID, will be an attribute that the institutions will have to support on their own?
I think we need to discuss this further, because I mean, at some point, the services, the Erasmus services, will have to be able to identify that the same user is coming back, regardless of how the users log in. So you will need some sort of account linking. How things will we are discussing about this, and in fact there will be a report on the technical workshop that describes also the architecture and how things will work. So and we want to share this report also with the EduGain Federation operators, because I think it's important to get their point of view into this. One of the things that we are discussing also is, for instance, also the format of the this IBAN ID that has been created. The idea is really great, but we are also discussing, we need to have a broader conversation actually within also the federation operators to see whether this can be deployed by all federations or whether there are showstoppers for that. So we need to have a broader conversation. And in fact, together with Christos, we were having some chat during TNC about this, but we should really have maybe a dedicated meeting to go over the details. I don't know if Christos is still online. I see him still online. I don't know, Christos, if you want to say something to that, or you are okay with that?
No, Lucia, I'm okay with this. My connection is pretty bad today.
I know.
Yeah.
I think maybe just to add from the side of the European University Foundation, we indeed, I mean, and also when we started this discussion, the cooperation between Erasmus Without Paper and the European Student Card Project, they indeed proposed to come up with this sort of IBAN-based format for student identifiers. And we indeed found that idea very interesting to be deployed insofar that if the same standard is applied by the different higher education institutions and therefore supported by the NRENs, it would allow us to redeploy this sort of single entrance point for students into the Erasmus Plus program, which would basically allow the student, for example, just using, for example, a use case, to authenticate using his home student account or authentication process to log in into the Erasmus Plus app. And from there, for example, to request the transcript of record, which is the document that the student gets at the end of his stay when he's going on an exchange with Erasmus Plus, that contains all the grades and the credits. That's a document that basically proves what he has achieved in terms of academic performance and will help him to get his studies recognized at his own institution. If you don't really have this sort of decentralized standard of using a single identifier, it's going to be much more complicated to get to that process. For now, what we have in Erasmus Without Paper is a system-to-system communication tool. So from one higher education institution to another higher education institution. And that sort of works because we basically send a list of nominated students. We send documents from one information system to another information system. But there's no individual that sort of creates a request into the system. And for an individual to be able to create a request into the system, this MyAcademicID project and this European EID scheme, we call it EID scheme, would of course be perfect. And that's why we have had also talks with Rich and Christos in the past technical workshops. No, from our side as well, to start understanding what the EduGain world is like, looks like, and what can be supported and what cannot be supported. And I assume that you will have further discussions on whether this can become an attribute, whether it's a new attribute or could replace an existing attribute within the EduGain system. Yes, those are all open questions. However, knowing that, of course, the Commission and the universities will want to start adopting those tools. So we shouldn't wait for this process to be completed in 5 years, but we should make sure that we have rather intense discussions in the coming 12 to 18, maybe 24 months.
Yes, I would like to say also that, and Hervé Bourgault from the Renater is also online. I guess he wants to say something about this topic, because we made a consultation here among the universities in France connected to Renater and connected also to the European Student Card and eager to enter in the Erasmus Without Paper project. And obviously, what is at stake with this is that if everybody is using the same structure for the student identifier, it will help, of course, to connect different systems. And obviously, what about if we talk about the Federation of Identity from the university's point of view, the question is, do they go on using different student ID when they connect to different systems? For instance, in France, for the moment, they are using EPPN for the Federation of Identity. They are using now a student national ID called INE for all the communication with the Ministry of Higher Education, and all students now will have a long life identifier called INE. And they are using the format of the European Student Identifier, which is the IBAN format, country code, institution code, and student identifier for the European student card. So what they say is very clear. They say instead of having 3 different identifiers, we do prefer to use only one for all systems. And even if it's a change, of course, in our IDP and we have to do it. But for the moment, we are using a EPPN, which is not a really unique identifier. It may change, and it may be reassigned to student, and it's a problem. And then the question of the format is not really a problem. You can build the format when you connect the different systems. It doesn't mean that you have to store, for instance, the country code or the institution code in your IDP.
Jean-Paul, sorry, I think we should stop the conversation here, not only because we are over time, but I think we are getting very much into details. So the recording will be online, and we will organize a more dedicated discussion about these topics in the future. So thank you very much, everybody, for being there. And I wish you a good holiday for those of you that are going on vacation, and I will talk with you later on.